Pues retomamos con la última sesión de esta Escuela de Verano en Humanidades Digitales. Es todo un honor presentarles a un invitado que viene de muy lejos, es Eetu, Mäkelä, que viene de Helsinki, de Finlandia, y bueno, pues estamos encantados de que esté aquí porque nos va a presentar pues toda la iniciativa de Linked Data en Digital Humanities que han desarrollado allí y que la verdad es que para pues esta parte de Europa a veces es más desconocida y realmente pues nos produce muchísimo interés. Así que thank you very much, Professor Eetu Mäkelä. It's a pleasure to have you here. The talk will be in English, but if you have some question, please raise your hand, ask in Spanish, email us. There's no problem at all. So thank you very much, and here's Professor Mäkelä.
All right, thank you. So a little bit about my background before I get into business. I'm a computer scientist originally, and still look at digital humanities from a computer science and actually linked data viewpoint. So I'm originally a linked data researcher, but more and more recently in the past 5 years, I've moved into digital humanities and particularly developing tools that support people in the humanities in doing their research. And that will be the topic of this presentation. Multiple actual sort of use case projects that I've been involved in that have used linked data in the pursuit of digital humanities work. But before we can get to linked digital humanities, I find it prudent to look at digital humanities in itself. So if you look at an abstract schematic of the ideal digital humanities research projects, I would say that it is humanities research. So you are interested in getting humanities insight from digital collections of data. So you start with some data, and then you have some processing and analysis tools that you can apply on that data, and you very often do this iteratively. So you explore the data, seeking to find some humanistically interesting outcome from it. Unfortunately, this ideal workflow never works out in practice, and the first reason for this is in the data itself. You, of course, if you generate the raw data yourself, you know what has gone into it and you know how to process it, but it's a big amount of work to create that data. So very often in digital humanities, and particularly when you're talking about the semantic web and linked data digital humanities, you'd like to make use of already existing large linked data, open data repositories to base your research on. So then you come up with the realities of data out there. So the reality is first that there is a large amount of data out there of interest to humanities scholars, particularly large cultural heritage collections or in the sort of general cultural heritage sphere. So Europeana collects millions, tens of millions of cultural heritage objects from all around Europe. The Digital Public Library of America does the same for the Americas. And then particularly in the library sphere, you have many national libraries around the world converting their data into open linked data and merging them together with joint authority files so that you could use that data in anything that you want. So in the general cultural heritage sphere, there is much activity and much opening of data. But then looking at data that would be of most interest to scholars in the humanities, sort of humanities data, a lot of that is still hidden behind commercial library service companies. So for example, early English books online, 18th century collections online, 19th century collections online, and so on, have been digitized and OCR'd, but they're not generally available. You have to pay a license and sign agreements in order to get them. For early English books online, for example, there's also an alternative route. So people have been manually keying in many different university libraries these books, and that part of the collection is open, but not the whole collection. So on the one hand, there is a lot of material out there. On the other hand, that material isn't tuned for humanities scholars, so it wasn't made with the humanities scholar in mind. And that creates all sorts of problems when you want to use that data in practice, because you are faced with something like this when you look at the data. And this is the MARC cataloging format used in libraries, but it's just an example. When you really want to use some data, whichever data it is, if it's linked poetry data or anything, there's some format, some schema behind it being created, but you need to figure it out in order to be able to make sense of it and use it. And there, your first goal should be to look at the documentation. And there's a very wide field of possibilities concerning documentation. So, for example, the museum standards and the library standards are too precise. So if you want to figure out what this actually means, they would like you to go through 1,700 pages of documentation for that. On the other hand, for some other collections, stay link, but for some other collections, you have only a single page of definitions of what this collection contains, and you're forced to figure out yourself what the content is. But even if you have this very, very long documentation on what's supposed to be in the database, it often isn't what is actually there. So there's this problem of missing documentation, so which will bias any research you want to do on that data. So, for example, the Finnish national bibliography is missing a lot of publications from the middle of the 18th century just because they were never indexed. And in a lot of these collections, the cataloging standards have also changed. So the collection will contain some fields for only certain years or certain batches of documents. And again, all of this will bias your interpretation when you try to base research on these collections. And then we get to the actual practice, the ugly of these collections, in that very often they contain messy data. So here are the place of publication fields from the French National Library, for example, for just a subset of items that were printed in Paris. Some of these actually have semantic meaning. So if you have parentheses, that means that the place of publication is known but wasn't explicitly stated on the front page. It's on some other page. And if you have square brackets, the place of publication wasn't stated at all but is known. But then even aside that, you have various different ways of encoding this place, which will throw off algorithms trying to count how many publications were printed in Paris, for example. And every time you're trying to convert these to linked data, for example, where you have a resource for Paris, a strong identifier, you're also up against these problems. And it gets even worse when you have items that were published in multiple places at the same time. So here's another type of problem in that this is the virtual international authority file, which joins together the authority files from libraries around the world. And what an authority file is, it's a record of different ways of naming a person, so as to be able to identify all the books written by this person. You need to know all the different ways of writing his name. But then, because you are applying automatic processing to translate from this last name first name base to first name last name, in the published open linked data version of this data set, you also often end up with problems. So for example, the name of this place, according to this data set, is now also the same as the name of this place. And this, of course, doesn't hold. The person isn't the place. It's the viscount of that place. And here's sort of the first exercise that I'd want you to do, to look at for just a couple of minutes. Here are the original forms of the names from the various national libraries. And for, let's say, 3 minutes, try to figure out why, just from this encoding, why does an algorithm produce this pure name of the place for the person? It's useful to look at, so all of these A's and C's and D's are in practice different fields in the authority file. So what's happening is that the algorithm is picking some of these fields and realigning them and dropping out others. And for some of these formats, for some of these national libraries, this ends up being a problem because you are dropping out important fields. So a couple of minutes. Someone tell me why this person ends up with the name of just place. And pay special attention to all of these cross C's and A's. This is just an example of the type of detective work that you need to do if you want to use a linked data dataset or any dataset to understand why things go wrong and are wrong in the data, so that you can use it and be aware of the biases that it contains. Yep.
How can we reach that beautiful diagram that you had before? How can I reach that web page?
It's this link. And then you need to scroll down a bit. So these are all the sort of different authorized names in different national libraries around the world for this person. Oops. And you can go look at them if you click on them. It's this information that has been used, processed a bit to create the public open data set, and something goes wrong in the processing. Any guesses? So one of the things that it does is that, for example, for the French field, it drops the F, so it drops the dates, then it takes the B field, and then it adds the A field, so you end up with Charles Victor Prévost d'Alincourt. And similarly for the German National Library, it drops the D field, the dates, and it takes the A field and turns it around at the comma, so you get Charles Victor Prévost d'Alincourt. The problematic ones are these. So here, the actual name is in a Q subfield, and for some reason the algorithm doesn't know what a Q field is. So it doesn't take the actual name, it drops the D, it drops the C, and only takes the A field. So that's why you end up with the person's name being the name of this place, Alincourt. And there are actually 4 culprits. So the Catalonia National Library, the Library of Congress, Israel, and Ireland all follow this pattern, and the transformational software doesn't understand it and ends up with a wrong presentation of the name. And if you look at the data, then probably every publication that was published here would be attributed to this person, which would skew the data very badly. So that's just one example in data where you really have to be aware and do detective work to figure out how that data set has been created, what kind of algorithms have been done to it. Here's another example. So here are all the public datasets that are openly available from Europeana. And it says that there's a detailed overview of the datasets and their providers available as a Google spreadsheet. So that's nice. From that we'll figure out what datasets are in Europeana, and we know if we can use them or not. And then you go there, and you figure out that it's being put into the trash by its owner. So you create your own copy of that, and then you start looking at this detailed overview of the data and figure out that you only get the amount of if they're image, text, sound, or video, or 3D in the dataset, and you get who's created it. So, for example, the National Library of Finland has donated this dataset of 188,000 texts, and there's a cryptic identifier for that. But how am I supposed to figure out from this what it actually contains? And there are very, very many of these here. So what, for example, has the Catalonian Library donated to Europeana? All of these are 1,000 sort of records. They're probably a sample of something. What are they a sample of? How big a sample are they? Are they uniformly distributed or what? So again, this just tells you that it's actually really hard to use any data that's out there. It's always corrupt and problematic. So if you want to use it as part of your actual humanities scholarship, your research, you need to apply cleanup tools to it. And in addition, you need to put a lot of effort into understanding and cleaning the data so that you end up with a clean version of it that you can base research on. And actually, in this subfield, some publications are only about sort of trying to discern what a particular collection has ingested so that you can use it. So you already end up with a bit more complex view of the digital humanities research project process than the ideal picture of just applying tools and coming up with results. But it gets even more complex than this, because in reality, none of these tools also have yet been created. So for every new data set, every new purpose, the world for digital humanities isn't ready yet. You will need tool development. You will need computer science work in creating the cleanup tools, the analysis tools, the processing tools that will allow you to do your core humanities scholarship. And that's why I really do think that digital humanities needs to be a transdisciplinary collaborative effort. It needs all of these fields. It needs the humanities subject matter expertise. Without that, you cannot do humanities scholarship, even digitally. You need the computer scientists to be able to develop new algorithms. But you also need the more traditional applied statisticians and, on the other hand, theoretical mathematicians to develop novel machine learning algorithms. So all of these fields will necessarily never fit an individual person. There is an absolute need for collaboration in a digital humanities effort. So then, after all of this, we now finally get to linked data and linked digital humanities research and what that adds to the process description. So what does linked data do very well is that it makes it possible to integrate data from different data sources. And for example, if you want to compare poetry across different nations, you want to see book publications across all of Europe, or look at the correspondence networks of intellectuals. All of these data sets are currently in silos in archival institutions all over Europe. You'd want to be able to look at it as a whole. And linked data as a technology is very, very good for these things. But again, it adds another layer of complexity because the world isn't ready yet, linked data isn't ready yet. Those unifying data models, integration tools, publishing platforms, and all of that needs to be created before you can do work on the unified picture of cultural heritage, for example, in Europe. And you hope that all goes well and you're able to integrate these, and it doesn't end up with a huge whirlpool of stuff of different formats, different languages, different metadata schemas that you just can't get a handle on. And it's very possible for this process to merely just explode all over the place if you're not really careful. So you hope you'll end up with a clear integrated view into a distributed whole and try to avoid it blowing up in your face when you're doing linked digital humanities research. And with that sort of out of the way, oh, there's actually this one more, is that if you're thinking about what data will make good linked data, it's data that's part of a wider context, because linked data is about integrating things, is about making things easy to integrate. So a lot of humanities data very nicely fits this picture, because all of culture and human endeavor is connected. And while the documentation for that, the history of that, is currently spread in silos, in archives and museums and so on, they were created as part of a whole network that spans the world, or at least Europe. And particularly in the sort of cultural heritage sphere, there's also a lot to build on. So there are these unified registries of people identifiers, place identifiers, and so on, that you can use to link your data to a common reference point, so that it really forms a big whole. And there's also a lot of these schemas that allow you to specify the format of your data, even though I actually think that for linked data technologies, they're not as important as the sort of network forming capability of using shared vocabularies, reference vocabularies. So here's the sort of core abstract view of a linked digital humanities research process. I'll show another slightly separate view, which is that for a traditional, and what sort of doing linked digital humanities research enables you to do. So here's the traditional humanities workflow. You discover or create some data that's of interest to you. Particularly with linked data, you ingest and integrate that so that you can then explore and interpret it, and then you publish a monograph or a scientific publication on your results. So if you have linked data, you could also publish your interpretations as data, and through that create a virtuous cycle whereby also, I mean, the people in the biological sciences do this very, very much. They do research, it produces a data set, and then that data set is published for also others to use. And this could also be the case in the humanities, basing on linked data. If you take a data set, do some original research on it, you could also publish the results of that research as data for others to use. So for example, in Oxford, there's this Cultures of Knowledge project that curates the early modern letters online letter database about correspondence in the early modern time around Europe. And they've done also prosopographical research on that data. Prosopography meaning how the intellectuals across Europe interacted and met each other and taught each other and so on. And they've formally encoded that as data so that when they publish that, others may use that sort of network of relations and connections across Europe to base their own research on. So what we are left with here is, how can all of these phases be done? What kind of tools do we need to support scholarship, a digital humanities workflow based on linked data? And here's just another way of formulating that. So here are the sort of general tasks that a linked data digital humanities workflow needs. Often you need to model your data, correspondence, poetry, whatnot. You perhaps need to create some data of your own that fits that model, or there is ready data somewhere out there in archives, but it's not in this common data model or format, so you need to convert it. You may need to publish your own data for others to use, or you may need to discover what others have published. You may need to integrate the collections that are spread around Europe. And finally, what you really wanted to do in the first place is to explore them and do actual humanities research based on them. Very often, any single digital humanities project will not be able to tackle all of these. So they either just stick to modeling and publishing a bit of data, or then try to integrate and do something with data that's already out there. So, but this will be the sort of vantage point or reference point of things that a digital humanities linked data project can attempt to do. And with that, I look at actual particular case examples that I've participated in. So the first one of these, I already talked a little bit about this, is on early modern European correspondence networks. It's headquartered at Oxford, but it's broadened from that into a European Union cost action, which is sort of a collaboration action meant to bring people together who are working on a common theme. And this is a really big one. So it has 33 countries around Europe and also the US, and in total 180 people as part of the network. Its core is the early modern letters online database, but there are also a lot of other databases of correspondence and letters out there. And what's being sought after in this action is the possibility to get the correspondence information from all over the archives in Europe that have it, create a common whole about it, so that you could use that data to figure out how information and innovations spread, and how intellectual discourse propagated across Europe in this time of early modern enlightenment, when the postal system provided the capacity for people to communicate all across Europe. So what does it look like in practice is that, for example, we've converted the early modern letters online database into linked data, and it has both a correspondence database as well as the prosopographical database, so life event database related to people. So you have a lot of people there, you have their birth and death events, and a lot of letters exchanged between them, as well as the particular versions of those letters. So you have printed copies, you have original manuscripts and records and so on about them. Unfortunately, we don't yet have the permission to publish early modern letters online as open data, so this particular view to it is limited and password protected, so you can't actually go look at it. But it's sort of this traditional linked data dataset, so that you have an identifier for Madrid, and then you get all the letters that were sent to or sent from there, as well as sort of people who were born or died there, and you can navigate this to look at them. But there is something that you can do with this database, which is that I've created a subset of that data and packaged it so that you are able to, weird layout here, but let's see if I can get it to work. Too low resolution, I think. So you are able to load this data into, for example, the Palladio tool, which has been created at Stanford University. Let's see if I can get something reasonable out of this. And this tool is a very useful tool for you to know in general, because besides linked data, you can load in any CSV file of your own here and get quite advanced functionality out of it. So I'm sorry that the resolution is so low here, but on the top hand we have a sort of a connection network between people in this early modern letters online dataset, and on the bottom hand we now have a timeline of those events. And I can, for example, just by dragging, filter this network to only a particular section of time to look at the relations between these people at a particular time. I can drag that selection to look at a different time and see how their sort of personal relations change, and look at all of these individual events also, which they are. So there's a table view, there's this graph view, but there's also a map view. So I'll remove the filters. And I encourage you to experiment with this tool, both on this data as well as other sample data. So you can see here the geographical spread again of this particular subset of data is people associated with Samuel Hartlib and their connections. So people 2 degrees removed from Samuel Hartlib, who's here at the center. So again here you can, for example, just paint a particular subset of this time and drag the slider to see the geographical influence of Samuel Hartlib's circle of correspondence and how that changes through his lifetime and beyond. So you see it start with sort of northern edge of Central Europe and then spread also across France later. So those two were just on the early modern letters data, but what linked data is really good about is, and again, sorry, some of these data sets aren't really open right now, so you can't go through these examples. Here are SparkQL queries, again, magic queries to bring in information from multiple sources. So you can just see that it really is sensible to take in multiple letter collections and join them if you want to see the common whole. So there are many people who have letters in EMLO, but also have letters in other collections, such as Electronic Enlightenment and one French corpora that's also included here. So if you want to get a view of the common whole, you really need to join these collections. And here's another example where we are joining the letter data with publication data from the French National Library. So if you want to see the networks of correspondence of only those people who were publishing philosophy in French, you can now do that by combining these data sets. And that's what linked data enables you to do. I'm not going to show this in any detail, but here's another sort of example where you're querying for publications of philosophy, Enlightenment philosophy, in the French National Bibliography, and plotting that on a motion chart. And here's our works, on this axis are works that aren't philosophy, and here are works that are philosophy. And the scholarly humanities question here was that, was the Enlightenment anti-government? So did you have to publish your philosophy outside of France, or sort of tell that this was published outside of France? In actuality, it was often still published inside France. So all the places that end up on the right-hand side of this diagonal are places that published disproportionate amounts of philosophy. And you see sort of Geneva and Amsterdam popping up. And what was interesting to the humanities scholar here was that London, which was supposed to be one of these places, really didn't pop up that as much as they had anticipated. And what another interesting theory is this sun's location, which again tells you that a big part of this, we just don't know where it was published in, and you always have to keep that in mind when you are basing any sort of conclusions on this data. Here's just a couple of different views into the data to show that there are many tools that can take then linked data and provide different kinds of views to it. So we had this browsing interface, we had Palladio that allows you to interact with the data, we have motion charts, we have just traditional graphs, and here's another sort of graph that shows the sort of individual original collections that have gone into this common early modern letters online data set. Here's a different view to it, showing how many letters of men versus women are there in the collection, and you can see that women are a great minority, so there's just this one batch, one collection where there are letters from women or to women in the whole sort of early modern letter corpus. So looking at what the Reassembling the Republic of Letters has tried to do, it's tried to create a model for sharing correspondence information. It's tried to create a model for sharing biographical or prosopographical information. It's converted earlier databases into linked data. It should be publishing that data as open data, but there are intellectual property rights problems with that. It has, to an extent, integrated multiple correspondence collections together. There are ways to explore these collections, but in reality, they require you to know SparkQL at this time, which is a big hurdle to actual humanities scholars who would want to use it. So something, but not really there. The next use case I want to talk about is this mapping manuscript migrations, which is a very similar project to Reassembling the Republic of Letters. This time this is a transatlantic partnership of the Digging into Data initiative. So you have people around Europe and the US and actually also Australia, this time focused around manuscripts and their travels around the world. So again here a large amount of the work, and this is a project just starting, a large amount of the work will go into canvassing all the collections of manuscript information around the world, contacting them for the data, creating a unified data model, and trying to create a unified view of it. So here's just one page of the different collections, seeing that they're in very many different data formats. They contain information of very different types. So this isn't an easy task to create a unified model and make sense of all of this. And here's another page of just the same. Where we are here is that we've created an initial data model, and that initial data model ended up being quite complex because what the people, the humanities scholars, are interested in this data are mostly the sort of movements of the manuscripts. So who has had them in their collection at a certain time? When were they sold? How much were they sold for? How have they moved from a private collector's collection to another, and through which auction houses, and so on. So you're tracking the life of these manuscripts after they've been created. And you end up with quite a sort of a complex event-based module that has possession events and sale and gift and auction events that sort of have these manuscripts and people and places as participants and relate to the catalogs, the auction catalogs, and entries in them, and so on. And you have multiple copies of the sort of abstract level works, which are the actual content of those manuscripts, and so on and so forth. And this doesn't really even show then the actual work metadata. So when it's stored in a particular archive, this manuscript, it's been digitized. You have the page images and metadata associated with those, and so on and so forth. So what can you do with this then is that, again, you need to know some SparkQL, but then you can, for example, ask the question of Sir Thomas Phillips was a well-known collector of manuscripts, and his collection got spread out after his death. So you can be interested in what he collected. So here's a visualization of where the manuscripts in his collection were from. Or you can be interested in their life after they left his collection, after that collection sort of was auctioned and distributed. And here's another graph that shows how many hands have they passed through the manuscripts after they left his collection. And you can see that they've moved quite a lot. So most manuscripts that were in the Phillips collection have changed hands at least 3 times. And there are single manuscripts that have changed hands 28 or 25 times since they left his collections. So interesting stuff, again, to the humanities scholars who want to see these transactions. But again, there's this problem that currently, in order to drag this information out, you sort of need to know how to write this very technical SparkQL stuff. So what this project has done is model these events, convert databases into the schema, sort of a bit publish them, sort of a bit integrating them, although much of that will be future work, and looking at the potential of how you could explore this, but not really creating end-user usable interfaces for doing so. So in this following project, the end-user interface is precisely what we've been focusing on. So this project is an Academy of Finland funded project for doing socio-linguistic historical research. So the scholars here are interested in whose language dominates and gets to prosper. And I converted their letter corpus with associated social metadata. So you have metadata on the people's education and gender and social rank who wrote these letters. And the researchers are interested in certain linguistic phenomena, like how did English end up being a language where you need to write cannot together and not separate, cannot. that's a really abnormal way of writing things in English, but it's the current standard. So whose writing was that, and how did that become prominent? So I converted that data into linked data, and then started building an interface that would allow one to interactively explore this. This page is a link to the actual interface, so you can try that later. But I'll just go very quickly over it. So here on the left-hand side, you search for the linguistic phenomena that interest you, like the different spelling of can't, cannot. And in the middle, we try to support sort of moving from close to distant reading and back. In the middle, you can look at the individual letters that are using these constructions, and you get the cannot highlighted here, so you can see how it's actually been used. On the right-hand side, you get an aggregate statistical view of this. And you can partition that by the structured metadata. So you can see how, for example, women and men use these different forms. And you can use alternate charts. So you can see that for men, they use the spelling of cannot separately, sort of linearly declines. Women are much more varied in whether they spell can't separately or together, and there's this weird sort of bump in the contracted form can't, but it dies out at the end of the 19th century, and unfortunately the data also stops there, because I really want to know when does it resurge, because can't, the contracted form, is of course now very prominent in the English language. And you can use any of these sort of social metadata to group by, and this is based on the linked data, but all of that is hidden from the interface. So you can look at gender or societal rank and so on and so forth. And finally, again with the motion charts, you can also see individual people through time changing their behavior. So moving from using one form of language to another, and by clicking on them, you can actually get back to the individual letters they are writing to see in more depth how their use of language changes. So really, what this project focuses on is creating an interface. It's sort of a minor detail that this is also linked data, but it's very important for me in that I feel that the current problem with a lot of linked humanities data is that we can create data sets, we can publish them, but we don't really provide the tools that are understandable to the end users, that they could do something with that data by and large. This is still a very prototype level of an interface, so if you explore with it, expect it to crash horribly from time to time. So, but still. So then, quickly, a completely different kind of approach to linked data is the contextual reader that I did with Thea Lindqvist from the University of Colorado. Here, the goal is something completely different. We are trying to support close reading of material that in a domain that you're not familiar with. And the primary user group for this are students of history, so new students of history who are starting to read primary sources in an era that they're not already familiar in. So we wanted to automatically give context to the primary sources and also sort of enable them to walk from one collection to another to discover more related sources and data across distributed collections. And here this project was really starting from the idea that we want to use the existing sources out there and not create any new data for this, but just to figure out how the existing sources can be utilized. So let's see if this works. For some reason, the link to the first document doesn't work, so I'll try to create it myself. So let's see if it works. Right. So here's a scanned PDF that's part of the Colorado Library primary source collection on World War I documents. And what we are doing is that we are using natural language processing and named entity recognition on this live. So you can load any PDF or HTML document here, and it will try to figure out the entities related to the First World War mentioned here and highlight them. So the idea here is that when you end up with these sort of places, for example, that you don't really know where they are, you get maps of them, you get these glimpses of who these people who are talking here are. You can get explanations of these concepts that are mentioned based on Wikipedia here, and you can also get sort of links to, for example, events. If an event of the First World War is mentioned in this source, you can see how it relates to other events of the First World War, so you can see which phase of the war it sort of relates to, where it happened, what other things happened near there, and then is this sort of possibility to link other collections to it. So we are using queries to find related content from Europeana, Digital Public Library of America, and other sources, so that, for example, we get this monument to nurse Edith Cavell, who was shot by the Germans in Belgium in the First World War. And when we click on that, we, where are we? We can actually go there, and because this was dynamic, it can try to sniff out more information from any web page. So you can look at this First World War Poetry Digital Archive. It has a postcard about Miss Edith Cavell murdered, and then it has the sort of who had this postcard, and then you can go further to see their regiment and so on and so forth. So how does this work is that we do dynamic entity extraction, and we make use of linked open data vocabularies to find the entities there. So we have a list of all the First World War events, all the people and military units involved, places involved, and so on. And then we just scour the text of the document you are reading for those and are able to highlight them. And after that, we use also the sort of different spelling forms and names in different languages as search keys that we then feed Europeana, the Digital Public Library of America, and so on, in order to bring in related content. And this had to be done this way because none of these, Europeana publishes linked data, and the Digital Public Library of America also publishes linked data, but it's not really good linked data. So we got a better interlinking by using these glue vocabularies and using the traditional text search interface than we did from a sort of a semantic level work in linking. And then just sort of showing that this is a general system. We changed the natural language processing part and the vocabulary so we could point it at old ancient Latin texts, and you can get the sort of semantic annotations based on those. Or we've also used it for Finnish legal language, so that when someone is reading, for example, a Supreme Court decision, they can get definitions of these particular legal terminologies for them. Maybe that the server is now pretty overloaded, so I can, well, all right, so these come. So you get definitions for all of these legal terminologies here, for example. And in the Latin part, you are also able to cross languages, so once this runs, you can get English definitions of these words in the Latin article. So really, what in this project we did was focus on this discover and integrate and explore without having to sort of transform the integrated and linked resources into linked data. But we created ourselves, for example, the glue vocabularies, the lists of World War I entities that were then used to link these collections together. Let's see how I'm for time. All right. So the next I'm going to close a lot of these windows now. So the next project I want to show you is a much more traditional sort of integrating and publishing and modeling resources as linked data project. It's called WarSampo, and it joins together material related to the Second World War in Finland. It just got the Linked Open Data in Libraries, Archives and Museums award for open data. And it's online at this address. And what it does is that we've taken very different types of data, so heterogeneous information related to the Second World War. Unit information, place information, photographs, event information, but it all revolves around a common theme, the Second World War in Finland. And we created a unified whole of that, and then figured out which kind of views we'd want to give to that. So again, with the resolution, let's do it this way. So for example, this events view joins together very many different types of information. You have a timeline of First World War events in Finland. For some reason, the map really doesn't now work in this view. But let me see, I really want this to work better. All right, so this looks a bit better. So you get events and their places on maps at a particular time, and there's a heat map for example, that sourcing the casualty database, so you see where the battles were, where people were dying on the map, and you get individual points for those. And all right, so now it seems to be working a little bit better. And then we also, for example, have photographs from the Finnish military archives, and we've been able to automatically join those with events and people. So we have photographs taken of these events. What's happening? And then, so that's the event perspective. You see the general events of the Finnish Second World War. You can look at people and units participating in battles, and you can see the casualties on a heat map. You can also start from a particular person, and if you just want to know what their sort of route through the Second World War was. So you can see all the photographs depicting this person. This is one of the sort of famous generals of the Finnish Jäger battalion. So there's also information on them from Wikipedia, but we join together photographs of him. We can list all of the events that they participated in. We list all the units that they belong to, all the battles they participated in, and their sort of progression through the military ranks and medals given, and other people who are somehow related to him, or as well as places. So really what this enables you, when you join heterogeneous, different kinds of material around a common theme, it allows you to contextually browse through different aspects, different viewpoints, but still maintain a semantic connection and not really have to worry about that originally this information comes from Wikipedia, then the photographs have been stowed away in the Finnish sort of military archives. The events come from sort of event timelines that were originally in books. The units come from sort of cards in the military archive, and so on. And then there's, so here's, you also have places and so on. Let's look at this one. So this one just shows you that we've then also combined the contextual reader within this interface. So one of the materials that we have are sort of reminiscent articles by people who participated in the war. So 10 or 20 years later, they wrote their memories down in a public magazine that's now being digitized, and we are using the contextual reader to find out references to the military units and people mentioned in these articles, so that if one of the persons that you're interested in is later mentioned or wrote an article in this magazine, you can then go read it. So, and let's see, there's, what hasn't been published yet in this portal but will be is also an interface where you can then do sort of statistical queries to figure out if people from the higher ranks of society sort of survived the war better, and so on, and how they were distributed. So starting to edge toward more to the digital humanities scholarly side of delving more deeply into these events. But really the reason I wanted to show this to you was to show that around a common theme, it really is possible to link together very different types of material and provide a sensible whole and different perspectives originating from different viewpoints then into that material. And you don't need anymore to mind about the different original data formats and data sets. So what's done here is a lot of conversion, some creation of data, but very much focused on publishing this as a linked data dataset, but also publishing services on top of that that integrate these different data and allow you to explore it as a common whole surrounding the theme of the Second World War in Finland. So a lot of these, or almost all of these, have been quite big projects that have taken ready data out there and tried to do something sensible with it. But that doesn't have to be the case when you're doing linked data. So I took this ancient name dropping that I did with a classicist at Stanford as an example, where he had done hand-curated co-citation analysis of ancient Greek natural science texts. And they were in an Excel spreadsheet originally. And I just quickly converted them into linked data so that I could use my ready battery of tools to then explore that. And one of the tools applied was this, where all right, showing up a bit weirdly without the links on this page, but nonetheless. So here's a subset of the data, because apparently when you're writing natural sciences in Greek, you need to refer to authorities to back your claims up. And those authorities can be other natural scientists, but just as well they can be mythological entities such as Apollo and Dionysus. So here's a subset of the co-citation graph where at least one of the citees is a mythical entity. And unfortunately this screen doesn't show the connections, but if yours does, it will show that Odysseus is the sort of mythical character that's used to join together the mythical realm with the mundane, these real-life people who are referred to as authorities. So they are referred to as an authority in combination with Odysseus, and then in other places of the text, Odysseus is referred to in conjunction with Dionysus and so on. And then Homer is at the center of all of this. But what I really wanted to get across with this is that linked data digital humanities research doesn't have to be grand projects that use big ready data sets. It can also be your personal data that you've hand-curated in an Excel sheet. And this one I converted to linked data so I could use the tools at my disposal, but we've also, for example, just loaded the Excel sheets into Palladio, the tool that I showed earlier, because that can also work with just CSV sheets. So there are also tools by which, easy to use tools by which digital humanities can be done just with your own data. So really here, focus on taking the ready tools that we have, just converting that data into linked data, because the tools operate on linked data, but then focusing on exploring to discover the end humanities research question that were of interest to him. And then my final sort of project, which is just ongoing, but which I think is important, is this FIBRA project that I'm doing in collaboration with Stanford University. Again, their Humanities plus Design Research Laboratory. What I've alluded to in a lot of this talk is that I think there is a problem currently in linked data, linked humanities data, in that there really aren't available good tools to explore and process that data for a humanities end user. And that's what we are trying to attempt to fix in this project. So it's supposed to be a human scale tool for linked data that supports critical inquiry by a sort of a single humanities scholar. So what we want to enable them to do is to source information from these vast, big data sets, but in a manner that's understandable, that you are only pulling in the subset that you're interested in. And then we'd like to be able for them to organize that data in a way that makes sense to them, add their own interpretations, which again goes back to the sort of being able to publish your own interpretations as data, and being able to capture both the data as well as what went into this. So what are your interpretations and reasoning behind the data that you created so that others can trust it, and then finally being able to publish your work on the data that originated from that big collection for others to use. And this is very much a work in progress. So there is a public website here, and we are interested in people to participate in this project. And there's actually a test installation of the current work, current sort of interface at the Humanities plus Design site, but it's still such an early prototype that I'm really not gonna sort of suggest that you start exploring with it at this point. But what's really what we envision, what we are trying to accomplish there is to have visual means of, for example, visualizing the networks, easy interaction to pull in additional data, getting overviews of the data. So we have interface designers and linked data experts and humanities scholars working together to try to make this interface actually usable and to be able to use it for all of these tasks. So allowing you to model data, allowing you to pull in data, and allowing you to create conclusions based on that data. And that sort of brings me to this final slide, which is once more a final view of this digital humanities workflow, where you need to understand data, import data, edit data, reconcile data, and so on and so forth. So what FIBRA, the project with Stanford, tries to do is to sort of try to do all of this on a local scale in a way that's usable for a single humanities scholar interested in a particular small domain. And the reason I included this slide for you is that it contains links to a lot of tools that already do these things. Some of them have been created in our research group, a lot of them have been created elsewhere. So I encourage you to go through these tools and see what's out there. For example, Karma is a nice tool for converting data in CSV format into RDF, into a data model for publishing. OpenRefine can be used to clean CSV data and convert it into RDF for publishing, and so on and so forth. So there are actually a lot of tools already available for you to do digital humanities scholarship based on linked data. But there is also still a lot to be done here. So that's what I wanted to say, and I'm open to any questions or comments you may have.
So thank you very much. It was a very, very interesting presentation and very inspiring. So now it's questions time. So I would love to ask the attendant if you have some questions, doubt. So we are all impressed by the amount of projects and the variety of visualization and design too.
Hi, thank you for a very interesting talk and a very exciting array of projects. I was wondering, in terms of event extraction, to what extent was it dynamic by using syntactic parsing to identify subjects related to an event trigger, whether it was that way or more list-based, dictionary-based, and whether you would be interested in the more dynamic one? Or
Yeah, so that was completely list-based. The reason it was list-based was that we were sort of the primary focus of the contextual reader tool is to provide additional definitions and information. So it doesn't make sense to identify entities of which we don't know anything more. So we need to have that entity in Wikipedia or whatever source for it to be useful in that interface. In other scenarios, it makes much more sense to do the sort of traditional named entity recognition that isn't named entity linking or disambiguation. But yes, that interface and that work really much concerns with sort of named entity linking. So there's always a structured entity on the other side.
Right, yeah. No, thank you, yeah. No, I agree, because in some cases, this was also for people who are not familiar with the corpus. For very experts that may want to know lots of new things, the exploratory way might be more useful, as you were mentioned. Yeah, same. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, of course, if we identify entities, then we could use any entities, also those of which we don't know more information on. We could still use those as search keys to the other related collections to find items in Europe, for example, Europeana, related to that event. And that would be interesting, but would also probably practically be quite trying on the architecture.
Any more questions?
Thanks for the presentation, very impressive. In the first part of it, when talking about modeling, you mentioned that people is obsessed by reusing schemes, but that this is not so important. Could you elaborate this a little more?
So the reason I think that schemas aren't that important is that what forms the contextual network are the shared values of properties. And for that, it doesn't really matter what the property is. So the schemas often define properties. So it doesn't matter if you're using D.Sc term spatial or some other property to link the place to the item. The sort of contextual network is formed nonetheless. What is important in schemas is that there are these two major sort of viewpoints into modeling nowadays, which one of them is object-centric and the other is event-centric. And if one data source is modeling everything as events and the other as attributes of objects, then you start to get into some problems in sort of being able to interlink them intelligently. But as long as the sort of underlying viewpoint into how to model is similar on a very broad level, is similar in the different schemas, I think that the linked data techniques of mapping schemas will allow you to bridge that gap quite easily. Schemas are in general just tens of properties in the end, and classes. And if you compare that to the sort of hundreds of thousands of places or people or keywords that are the values then of those properties that are defined in the schema, the latter part of mapping those vocabularies is a much, much bigger problem. And that's why I think people should be focused on the shared vocabularies.
Okay, thanks.
One of the weakest points of linked data technologies is perhaps the visualization. However, in your slides, I'm impressed to see that you have overcome that so easily. What's your opinion on visualization of linked data, and how much did you have to develop yourself, and how much could you reuse from external libraries or resources?
Well, I do think that I would make that more broader. That it's not just visualization, it's exploration and interaction with the data. So the sort of easy to use tools to explore data are still lacking, linked data. There are already libraries for maps, for timelines, for statistics and graphs, and it's easy to take those and reuse them. But there aren't ready sort of interaction patterns or user interface designs that would readily apply to a lot of these linked data sources. And that's precisely what I'm researching, is trying to come up with reusable explorative interfaces that could be applied to different types of data sets so that we could overcome this limitation. So I think it's a really real shame that currently, if you want to pull, I mean, a lot of the visualizations that I had of for example, this is just combining a ready SparkQL editor library with the Google chart visualization library. So both of these pieces are there. It was really easy to hook them up. But the problem is here that you need to know SparkQL in order to use this. And you need to already know the data model of the data source behind this. And there are pieces missing here. We need better interfaces so people don't have to write and learn SparkQL. And we also need interfaces for people to more easily learn the data model behind the data source and not have to sort of just browse through it to extract it. So we need automated means that will sort of come up with nice pictures and descriptions like this slide automatically from the data, so that people will be more easily able to know what a data set contains. But that's why I like this. That's why I'm excited about this. There's still lots to be done.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, we are impressed by the interfaces, and we think also that Digital Humanities has a lot to do in the part of design and including this kind of interface usability in order to make linked data more usable for every kind of user. And I think that's important, and that's so much to do in that sense. Okay, more questions? So if you have any further questions, you can ask at the platform. Thank you very much, Professor Mäkelä. It was a pleasure to have you here. And yeah, we will continue contributing. Thank you.